Sometimes you got to wonder whether these guys in charge of companies actually play any video games, and when looking at them, I think the answer is no. You see, what's happened in the gaming industry is that effectively a lot of these C-suite or executive positions are held by people who don't really engage with the services itself, or really haven't grown up with playing video games, in my opinion at least. The reason why I say that is you can tell when somebody is passionate about something, when somebody really cares about something, and whether they want that certain thing to grow in a certain way. Now, ultimately, when it comes down to CEOs or in some cases the C-suite executives, one thing I've noticed is they're always chasing profits and rather bonuses as well and investor money. Now, there are ways of doing this, obviously. Obviously, if your company grows via investment or rather via sales, that can also help as well. But at the same time, it can also be done by duping investors. That's my opinion as well. Telling investors what they want to hear or sugarcoating news to investors with the aim of getting them to obviously back the company and not really pull out of it. And this is where it comes into this whole physical disc backlash from PlayStation. So this article comes in from Vice. It is a few days old at this stage, but I thought it'd be a good idea to just read over it. I've been sitting on it for a while now, and I started to think to myself as well. Recently, I built a PC. It's a complete junkyard PC from like 2008, but it does play some games that are found on the PlayStation 4 and on the PlayStation 5. Albeit, it's a bit janky. You gotta play it like 720p. In some cases, it's 30 frames per second. Sometimes you get 60, but it's janky and a mess. But I built it for basically next to nothing, and I thought it'd be cool to talk about or briefly touch on that while going through this article. So, from Vice, the headline reads, PlayStation responds to physical disc backlash. Now, I'm just going to briefly read through this. I don't want to bore you with a very lengthy and long article, and there's a few things we just need to go through over here. So, basically, it's been a month since they've obviously made the announcement, and they remained silent the entire time. The only time Sony finally broke its silence and responded to players was at a recent investor meeting. Now, you got to keep in mind that this wasn't responding to the actual crowd of people fighting against this. This was a response to actual investors. So when they're addressing whoever, you got to keep in mind, it's not the gamer, it's not the customer, it's not the people who have supported Sony through the decades that they've been around. It is to the current investors in the company itself, the people who effectively give the executives their bonuses in this day and age. Now, during a July 31st Q&A session with shareholders, Sony CFO Lin Tao addressed physical disc backlash response. PlayStation is moving forward with its plan to end physical discs anyway, and doesn't believe the backlash will impact sales. Obviously, they are addressing investors with this type of speak. And here's where it comes in. You see, to some extent, she might be correct, in the sense that maybe they're relying on all of the digital sales to somewhat dupe investors into thinking that they've grown or whatever it is. Or maybe they're just going to release a ton of exclusive games in the future, and they're just going to shove everything onto Sony hardware, whereby it's impossible for you to actually get that game elsewhere, so you'd have to basically be forced into purchasing it. My thing about this, though, is when it comes down to this type of speak, it's clearly something where they want to reassure investors. So obviously, if they were to backpedal or to some extent crack under the pressure, investors might just smell some blood in the water and decide to pull out. So that might be one other thing that they're looking at. Now, going back to the article, Sony stated that so far it has not seen any negative impact on sales following the announcement, and does not expect this to change when the effects take place, or when it takes effect. The company believes the future is digital for virtually all platforms of media. They reiterated that they will proceed cautiously with their plans. You see, the thing with this is it's a bunch of rubbish, because recently they brought back vinyl. A vinyl player, actually, they were promoting it. Now, from what I can remember, vinyls came out before I was born. I'm now 35. And I don't know when it was invented, but I do know that vinyls have been around long before Blu-ray discs have. And video games in this, well, media format as being at the disc-based format. So I find it hard to believe that people want to own their music on vinyl, but video game or gamers don't want to own physical games. And even like with physical games as well, the thing is, what happens if only 2 million units exist of a physical game, but it sells 20 million units? because there wasn't really any physical game left to buy. You're forced to buy digital, so they can use that to skew the numbers as well, as far as a digital versus physical split goes. That's what I'm just saying. I know it's not exactly something that happens, but it could be quite possible. What if they've decided, look, we scale back on physical just to skew the numbers a bit in the future and then ultimately kill off physical? That can also be what happened over here. Now, going back to the article, Sony CFO then said PlayStation is still assessing how to address feedback from players who are unhappy with the decision. The company said it's still figuring out how to respond to the feedback. It's simple. Just the way you responded to investors. We are not changing course, and this is where we are at. We are terribly sorry you feel this way, and we will be offering you the Sony quality of video game in the future. Be that as it may, I know it is disheartening to see or to hear, but rest assured, we will do our best from our side to meet players in the middle and ensure that we provide the best gaming service under the sun. There's something along those lines. But obviously they don't want to address it because of the amount of questions that will be raised, the amount of pushback they'll get. And right now the public has pushed back quite a bit. There's been quite a bit of backlash, and no matter what they say to investors, I mean, once those figures come out in the next couple of years, it's going to be a telltale sign of where they'll probably end up. I know a lot of people are switching over from Sony because effectively physical was the only reason why. I know a lot of people in my life as well would have went to Sony. They would buy the games cheap on the second-hand market. They would spend money on DLC and stuff like that, and whatever add-ons they could for the game, because they could, instead of paying the full $60 for the game, maybe they'd spend $20 on the physical copy, and they'd use a little extra to buy the DLC. So they had some money left over as well. So my opinion is Sony's kind of cutting their nose to spite their face over here. But anyway, going back to it. Considering many players are organizing a worldwide boycott of Sony PlayStation products from August 23rd to August 30th, the company might want to figure that out sooner than later. However, according to Sony, it doesn't believe the negative feedback will impact sales. Oof. Okay, to some extent they may be right, and the reason why I'm saying this is Sony can now be a bit more aggressive with it. You see, we already know about variable pricing, but if they wanted to, they could quite easily just change the price of everything and go back to just normal pricing. Or alternatively, they could have like a massive sale on items where they're willing to just cut like costs down a bit, but obviously just to keep people on that like retention cycle of continuously spending money, even if they don't really want to play the game. So for example, God of War Ragnarok, maybe it always sells for $70. Maybe they'll drop it down to $50 and they'll be like, for today only. And then all of a sudden, everybody floods the market because they don't have the game. And this might be their one chance to buy the game cheaper than they've ever had it. So Sony can abuse that position as well now. Sony explains why it announced the end of physical discs so early. Another interesting takeaway from the investor meeting is that Sony revealed why it decided to announce the end of physical discs this far ahead of the PS6. In another response, Lin Tao explained that Sony wanted to give retailers time to prepare for its move toward a completely digital platform. In other words, they want retailers to understand that we are cutting you out of the equation entirely. While there will be some codes in a box, I don't know to what extent it will be successful, because this means ultimately you're making a trip to the store to buy a digital game, which you can do from the comfort of your home, which Sony is doing on purpose for you to then eliminate the need for these physical games. Now, going back to the article, they confirmed the announcement to end this production was made early to communicate with retailers. Sony is working with them to do codes and packages. The subject has already been discussed in North American retailers, and now some will happen in other regions. This suggests that Sony plans to replace at least some physical games with download codes sold inside retail packages. While these products would remain available in stores, players would no longer receive a physical disc that they could lend, resell, or preserve. And that is what this is all about. Lend, resell, or preserve. They literally don't want you to preserve it because, like many people have pointed out, they've deleted Sony accounts left and right. They've deleted media from people's accounts. And the idea over here is that without a physical disc, you don't have to have the game in your account anymore. Think about the PT trailer. From what I understand, there's a patch on PS5 that prevents you from actually playing that game. So, who's to say the same thing can't happen when whatever game gets delisted out there? Even if it does remain in your library, they could easily, in this situation, just delete it from there or take it out or remove it. Whereas with the disc, it'll connect to a server. Maybe the server is down, there's no longer updates for the game, but you might have the 1.0 version on the disc that you could still play from start to end. So there's also that to take into consideration, that as far as video games go from a preservation standpoint, Sony obviously is not focused on preservation because, let's be realistic, I think if the Need for Speed franchise could delete Need for Speed Most Wanted, like from 2006, they probably would from everybody's library and then obviously resell it to you again on modern day consoles at a full price tag. I'm pretty sure they would happily do that if they could get the licensing for it and sell it to you for $80 without changing anything. Sony isn't worried about physical players moving to PC, and to some extent they may be right. Maybe they might just move over to Xbox. Kidding. Anyway, finally Sony argued that it isn't worried about losing physical displays to PC because consoles are significantly cheaper. Ouch. For now, Sony appears committed to ending physical disc production in 2028 despite the growing backlash. And here's the thing about it. I was able to build a computer for $0 from parts that nobody wanted that I found in a dustbin. Now, the reason why not everybody can do this, obviously, and there is a possibility that some people might be able to do it, or maybe they'll be able to do it for cheap. But I was able to find something that actually does play a long list of games. And for example, like Naruto, I think it's Boruto cross generations on the PS5. It plays it at 640 by 480p at like 30 FPS. But if you've got no money, and if you're a kid in school, or if you're trying to convince your parents to spend like $1,000 on a console, and you find this junkyard PC and you're willing to scrape by on it, you can. It does play GTA 4 at 720p, 60 FPS, or 40 to 60 FPS. It plays GTA 5 at 720p, 30 FPS with glitches and stutters, but still, it is doable. And if you've got no money, and considering how expensive everything is in this day and age, you can still play a long list of games on it, like Metal Gear Rising at 720p 60 FPS medium. I mean, some of the best games out there are available on this PC, but the thing I'm trying to drive home is that if I was able to build and play games have good games, fun games on hardware from 2008, there's a long backlog of games available on older platforms, PS4, PS3, PS2, PS1, whatever it may be. And you do have plenty of options ahead of you. Or behind you rather. And this thing where they believe that PlayStation 6 is going to be the future, for enthusiasts, yes. For ball and gun gamers, yes. For people who want to upgrade, yes. But ultimately not for everybody. And the sad thing is they're not trying to cast the widest net possible onto the biggest player base out there. They're just basically bringing it down to a niche, like you got to support our platform through our store. This is what we have to offer to you, and this is it. Call it a day. My thing about this is it's unsustainable because competition is very good. Having the option of physical allows you to buy your physical games cheaper and then spend money on the DLC. I bought my Spider-Man games on physical, used, cheaper, but the extra money that I had, which would have went to a full digital sale, I spent it on the DLC instead of not having the money for the DLC. And then eventually when the money did come through for the DLC, I would be like, I don't want to play this game anymore. I'm kind of past it. And that's something which tends to happen with me personally. I don't know if it happens with you or anybody else. But if I finish a game and DLC gets launched like a year or two later, it's very rare that I ever go back and play it. Or rather, if I don't have the money to buy the DLC, it's exceptionally rare. And I mean very, very rare that I go. And like 99% of the cases, I don't do it. I don't purchase the DLC because I'm already over that game and I'm not going to come back to it. I'm just done with it. I put it down and that's the end. Unless the game has infinite replay value like Devil May Cry, I'm not going to spend money on DLC. With Spider-Man, the day that I bought the physical game used is the day that I purchased the DLC for it. If I didn't have the money for the DLC at that stage, when I finished the game, I would have never purchased the DLC. Ever. And in my opinion, sometimes it's a good idea to make those sales on the back end than to rely on forcing people to buy these things, because you may end up doing this. Sometimes when you spend a little money, you spend a little bit of money multiple times without realizing you spent a whole lot of money. Whereas when you spend a whole lot of it up front, you're kind of a bit more cautious. For example, would you spend $90 on a game with its DLC? Or would you spend just $60 with the game and then eventually come back to the DLC, which you may or may not come back to? Alternatively, would you spend $20 on a used game and then buy like 5 DLCs for 5 different games for $30 each in the future? The little amounts, you see them individually. Only at the end when they add up, you realize you've overspent. But in that in-between period, you're not really looking at it as a $90 spend. You're looking at it as a $50 spend, which seems a bit more reasonable. if you get what I'm saying. And well, I guess that's where Sony will be losing out, in my opinion. Not everybody's going to have the money for the extra bells and whistles, and some people will just be point out frustrated at it. If the games are already going to be so expensive, why should they buy the extras on the side, the cosmetic extras, or the battle passes, or whatever it may be? Why should they fork out for timed events if that's even going to be a thing where you have to pay for? It doesn't make any sense, if you understand what I'm saying. And I get that probably they are relying on all of the ball and gun gamers who are hooked to maybe battle passes or ultimate team or whatever it is on these NBA 2K games where they're ripping character packs or whatever it is. They're banking on those gambling mechanics probably to keep them afloat. And what they don't understand is if people find cheaper alternatives to do it, they're going to do it. Why would somebody who is a gambling addict on 2K or even FC sit on $1,000 or a $1,500 console? I don't know. Whereas they could buy a PC for like $200 or $300 at 1080p and then put all of that other money into gambling on a different platform. You gotta weigh your options. But hey, I guess they've made up their mind. They want to please investors. That's where their loyalty lies, not with the customer. And let's see where this takes the company. I probably think it's going to go into the ground, but hey, that's just my speculation and I can't really tell the future. I can only guess. So guys, I'm out of this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, do subscribe, and come back for more. I hope to see you next time. Until then, you take care of yourselves and have a good one. Goodbye.